And guys, I hate to break it to you, there's not going to be any funding because there are no stakes. People crying that exercise science is still in its infancy. We have to wait for it to evolve. Exercise science is not in its infancy. It's fucking stillborn. Barbell apparel, base strength, Discord. Are you guys tired of this topic yet? I am too, but you clicked on the video, so I don't feel bad. Guys, we're going to do a review of a kind of rebuttal that Pack and Israetel did to a video I put out last year. Now, I was a little disappointed because I thought this was going to be a rebuttal, given that my video called Is Exercise Science Killing Your Gains? Actually, I think I asserted it a little more strongly. Exercise science is definitely killing your gains. That video, which is sitting at about 300,000 views, sparked a debate between me, Pack, and Milo that was moderated by Omar Issa. If you could check it out if you want, it's a little long and boring. But now Pack sits down with Israetel to make a video titled, Is Exercise Science Really Killing Your Gains? I thought any of the points that I offered would have shown up, but this just turned out to be a casual conversation, a little lazy, low effort about vague complaints from some of the dipshits in the comments. I was excited to see some substantive line by line arguing from one of the head honchos in the field. I was here for it. I've been waiting for it, but we didn't get that. This video boils down to the following. It's Mike dragging out bad punchlines for 3 minutes at a time.
Do you know what the Mexican donkey show is? The donkeys are fucking good at chess.
It's a focus on the supposed criticism that science changes, you guys never agree, and it's all unreliable anyways. Then there's an admission from Mike that it actually is unreliable. And then kind of a weird backpedaling that aimed to lower stakes, where he insisted that this stuff doesn't really matter and it's frivolous because the basics are the basics. Now, some of that stuff I really do agree with. All sciences do not have the same level of hardness. They don't have the same predictive ability, and I caught a ton of shit for bringing that up in my last video.
Do you think some of the frustration with exercise science is because it changes and because science can't give full certainty? Are some people just interested in like science and exercise being the same thing as like the science of transistors? Like, here's exactly the voltage channels you need, and we know this down to a 1-to-1 ratio. But not all sciences are of equal hardness to one another, if I may be so perverse.
The certainty you get when you're building a skyscraper to know how it's actually going to do the thing you want it to do is not the same as the certainty you get when you're pulling policies from a sociology textbook and lobbying to get it turned into law. Your predictive abilities over different domains changes wildly. That's going to change how you approach the study. That's going to change how you talk about it. It's going to change the risks you're willing to take in service of that thing. And this reinforces something I've also been saying, which is that I'm actually in agreement with these guys about what the science can and can't say. You can't listen to Krieger and Helms and Schoenfeld and Israetel long enough without understanding the importance of nuance and understanding the things these studies cannot say. It's the guys white knighting for science that largely misunderstand what it means with the term science being slapped on a domain, a field of study. It doesn't just mean, oh, we can shut our brains off. It's all done. Let's go home. Leave it to the PhDs. Mike knows this, and he even equated exercise science with social sciences.
Do people just want the kind of direct answers that a social science / physical science at this rate can't give them?
Do people expect this science to be as firm as like the science of transistors? No, because it can't be, but the consumer doesn't know that unless you make it very, very, very clear. Now, Mike did this kind of interesting thing where he also talked about the followers ruining it for everybody. Like, it's not just me, it's not just people on the outside that are like, grrr, science.
How many people out there training who are hashtag team science just have like just below diagnosable neurotic disorder? Because I think some people will be like, so do I do 37 sets or 39? And my response is usually like, you need to check into a psychiatric facility. I think a lot of people who flock to science are uncomfortable with uncertainty, and they pretend the science to have more certainty that it can give us at this juncture. And then some of them will assert to the bros, you're doing this wrong. Science says otherwise.
Yeah, exactly.
One PubMed link. There's much more context and nuance than any piece, if even agglomeration of research can tell you. Mm-hmm. And so a lot of people who just are uncomfortable with uncertainty pretend that science answers those uncertainties.
It's those people and people that don't get science that give science a bad name.
And I think that's actually hilarious because, one, I agree that most of the people who white knight on behalf of these evidence-based channels are actually off base. These are most of the people I get into arguments with. But two, I think Mike and company are absolutely to blame for how this gets communicated.
Do you think that's a little bit of an artifact of the YouTube title thumbnail game and the
Yes.
TikTok like game where people will be like, this new study on volume changes everything. And at the end of a 30-minute long in-depth discussion, they're like, it doesn't really change everything, but it's a cool new insight.
If you are constantly spamming optimal, best, fastest, most explosive growth, 52 sets, is that what I should be doing now? You are constantly creating this sense of FOMO in people that they need to be paying attention to the shit, that these granular details that Mike wants to hand wave away as being fringe optimization that doesn't matter that much anyways, that no, this is actually where the gains are. It is mixed messaging. You are 100% responsible for that. That is my gripe. You're getting the benefit of people mistaking these for firm conclusions that are giving them an edge, when in reality, it's nothing close to that. And towards the end, Mike says it's fringe. The basics are the basics. This stuff is marginal. It doesn't really matter anyways.
But there's a very big difference between altering the core fundamentals and looking for sense of optimality at the margins.
Yes.
When we're talking about core fundamentals, science has, first of all, never contradicted them and only has bolstered support for them. But on the periphery, very small details here and there, science can change on quite rapidly, but those details don't matter that much. And so a lot of exercise science is like, should you really be doing lengthened partials? I think it gives people a bit of anxiety to see that. But guys, these are all small things.
I actually agree with that too. The basics are where most of your growth is going to be. And the thing is, the basics aren't guaranteed. It takes work and effort and learning. There's a big learning curve to doing the basics and getting it right. So given that the basics are where most people fuck up, you have to take into account what you're giving up by pouring through the granularity of these research papers with their frivolous and uncertain bits of information. It's not just additive. You're actually taking away from time, effort, and attention that could be going to things that are obviously lacking. So the question then exists, if the best minds in the field all admit that this stuff only gives marginal benefits at the fringe, that it's frivolous, and that it's uncertain, you have to ask yourself a question. What's the justification for having literally all of your content revolve around it? Now, an academic talking about academic stuff makes sense, and you have guys like Krieger and Helms that I think are very good academic communicators. That seems to be their primary role. That's different, though, than the flood of fitness influencers who have globbed onto the Science Explains tagline, who use it as nothing more than a marketing tool. Jeff Nippert doesn't even have a bachelor in a kinesiology or exercise science related field, yet every single video he does is science explained with him poring over research papers. He doesn't do that because this is essential information you need to know. He does it because the content does really, really fucking well. And you make a lot of money selling programs, which Jeff does, if you can convince people that you have the keys to the kingdom. You have the esoteric knowledge derived from people who spend 8 years becoming doctors of PE, that they're going to get gains that they otherwise wouldn't have. Not only that, but they're going to do it the smart way. They're going to show everybody that they are the smartest science-based boy and that they don't give in to pagan rituals of bro science. They're enlightened. They're learned. Now, this is called story branding. It's effective ass marketing. It's where you sell somebody the toy, but also a story that makes them feel really, really good about having the toy because it validates parts of my identity that make me better than you. Now, Mike addresses this directly by asking, is the YouTube game to blame? Of course the fucking YouTube game is to blame. My gripe has never been science figuring shit out as it grows. It's been, while we know it's small, as people say, it's in its infancy, it's underfunded, it's on par with sociology. You still have an incentive for people to come out and make their name as influencers using nothing but the science to give them authority. It's disingenuous and it sends the wrong message to the consumer. So in that way, I have to ask how this is different than having a useless can of branched chain amino acids being sold under some cherry-picked research that shows it having some marginal effect in some hyper-specific condition. I don't think it is. Now, Mike also talks about there being a difference between making fundamental changes to the basics versus making changes on the periphery to optimize at the edges. Now, to anybody who's taking issue with what I'm saying, I would appreciate it if you go into the comments and talk to me like I'm 5 years old. Explain to me how small sample sizes of random ass mid lifters doing some watered down program as part of a control group is supposed to inform anything about the most developed, most advanced, most specialized lifters who are trying to optimize at the fringes. There's this assumption that persists that a consistent pattern of differences being shown in those groups within these studies can somehow carry over, can somehow inform what the most advanced or most developed athletes should be doing. And that is a wild assumption that doesn't even make sense on the face of it. Like, think about Jay Cutler on the warpath to take Ronnie down at the Olympia. He's been meticulously following, tweaking, personalizing his program for decades, and he's figured out what works for him, what tactics cause growth, and he's trying to milk just a little bit more, and he's habituated to everything. He's resistant to growth. His body already has more muscle than any human being would ever need, but he needs a few more pounds. But hey, Jay, it's all right. We got it. We got this study with 9 random dildos, and it turns out that if they exaggerate the stretch to an unreasonable degree, they get a marginal amount more muscle growth over a 10-week period. We figured it out, Jay. We just got to copy the average dildos. And in that context, you see how silly it is, because none of the information takes into account genetic differences. What does it even mean to be genetically elite? How do we even define that, let alone control for it? Does it take into account the program as a whole? Jay Cutler did like 50 fucking sets. He was a machine. How does that type of programming influence how a specific variable is going to fit into the whole thing? And it doesn't take into context time. Diminished returns come for everybody. If you go 10 weeks and you get a little bit of a buff from one variable, does that persist every 10 weeks afterwards into forever? Of course it fucking doesn't. So to take the honest bird's eye view of this, you have to see the differences that are measured within these studies as getting absolutely usurped by the immense galaxy of variables that we cannot account for.
You talk to one exercise scientist, you hear one thing. You talk to another one of you people, us people, and you hear another thing. How the fuck am I supposed to make sense of this shit? My first response to that would be, well, different bros say different shit, motherfucker, so it's no different. Arnold versus Mike Menser, both bros, completely contradictory training styles.
Yes, a lot of the stuff that bros or experienced coaches say also change or are very different.
As it should. Shit evolves.
Yes.
Weird.
I think that's a bit of a strawman argument. If you look in our field, with the exception of 1 or 2 crazy individuals who are doing all sorts of stuff, you've debated one, you'll see that there is a sort of consensus for most things and for most basic principles when it comes to getting jacked and getting super strong.
We probably agree on something like 90% of the core stuff.
More.
We can't agree on everything because there's not a degree of certainty that is allowable by science that is 100%. And so in addition to that, healthy disagreement means the debate is going on and we can push into directions of more certainty with research and with understanding.
So then we get to the part about agreement. We agree on 90% of stuff. The fundamentals have always been bolstered by exercise science. And actually, you idiot bros, you disagree on everything too. When we're arguing against two sides, people usually cut it in half and assign the symmetry to the two sides, and oftentimes it doesn't exist. When you have a clearly defined field that has specific boundaries and labels around it, and then you have just everything that's not that field, those are not weighted symmetrically. It's the same thing with high intensity. If the high intensity nut jobs make a claim, high intensity is a very specific thing. And if they make a claim against volume, that's literally everything that's not high intensity. So when somebody says, I trained volume and I didn't grow, that doesn't tell me anything. That just tells me your training was shit. The field of exercise science is very clearly defined. It's an actual academic discipline. Everything that's not exercise science can include the idiots clanging and banging at a 24-hour fitness, or it can include literal world champion coaches, athletes, influencers, the best of the best. It's just anybody that doesn't engage with research. So to talk about the bros disagreeing all the time, it'd be like if there was an academic department of martial arts and they were talking about like the bro MMA fighters in a way that put like Kimbo Slice in the same category as Royce Gracie. Now, when he gives an example like Menser and Arnold disagreeing on training, that doesn't show that, hey, there's something amiss in the field. We aren't on the same page as far as what is best. It shows that asking the question of what is best is actually really fucking stupid without a whole laundry list of context. The fact is, Dorian and Ronnie both got big as shit using vastly different methodologies. You have the gold medalists from the Soviet Olympic lifting team that use methodologies akin to super training that was written by Verkhoshansky. It's an absolute shit show exercise in overcomplication for the purpose of looking smarter than you are. On the other hand, you had the Bulgarian team get gold medals and set numbers that still stand to this day, training training like an angst-ridden teenager using lifting as a form of self-harm and just maxing the same lifts 3 times a day, every day of the week. The best powerlifters don't converge at all. You have people that meticulously follow percentage-based programs. You have people that winged it, high volume, low volume. You have people follow concurrent programs, linear programs. You have regular ass bodybuilders that came out of the woodwork and set world records just because they accidentally got strong by putting on a bunch of fucking muscle in a non-specific way. The bottom line is that nobody's trying to address bigger questions like if we can even say that one particular variable or approach is going to be better for the general population as a whole. Instead, there's just a wild assumption that it is that way. And as far as I can tell, there's no evidence that that would be the case. For exercise science to be able to comment anything about that problem, it has to be able to study these approaches on a much bigger, much more complex platform. And it won't, because there are no stakes, there's way too much complexity, and there's no funding. And guys, I hate to break it to you, there's not going to be any funding because there are no stakes. People crying that exercise science is still in its infancy, we have to wait for it to evolve. Exercise science is not in its infancy. It's fucking stillborn. Now, when he talks about the points of agreement, 10%, that feels like a lot for any scientific field to disagree on. But when you also consider the specific things within that 10% might be really big, important fucking things that you should just hand wave away as being minor details. One that comes to mind, which I actually see as a point of disagreement within the field that doesn't get talked about a lot, what is the actual method for taking a flimsy amount of information from incomplete research and applying that to our training in the appropriate way that doesn't give too much priority or otherwise kick out things that are of more importance? As far as I can see, nobody is contending with that question, and that's because there isn't a clear answer. They're fucking winging it. Then you have Milo, who just does lengthened partials because research, and I need to brand myself. And then you have all the people in the field of strength and conditioning who use all kinds of gimmicky shit because they know they're working with the best athletes who respond to just about everything, and their success doesn't actually hinge on hitting a 100-pound squat PR, just on being healthy and being in pretty good shape. They can and do fill in the gaps with a bunch of weird shit to try and set themselves apart and brand themselves as the next new cutting edge thing, even though, again, there is no convergence on methods in NFL, MLB, or NBA teams. And I don't know if you guys know this, there's an entire debate on whether or not athletes should even squat. That's a pretty big fucking point of disagreement in the field of exercise science, considering that supposedly they're in consensus about all the big rocks. So I guess you can get to where Mike is and say, yeah, there's this big consensus, and all you have to do is ignore literally everybody in the field who doesn't meet that criteria. So given that my entire point is the negative effect of all of these endless distractions that will pull people away from trying to figure out the fundamentals, if the PhDs in the field can't keep it straight and are prone to going down these crazy rabbit holes in service of putting to work the most cutting edge research, what are the odds that the layperson is going to be insulated from doing that? I would say exactly fucking zero. There is no scientifically approved method for balancing shitty, incomplete research with general wisdom. That equation doesn't exist. It's made up. So that's all I got for today, guys. Thanks for watching another Bromley rant. I promise I'm going to follow this up with something actually useful and instructional. In the meantime, check out our Discord. We got a cool ass community there. People just filling that up constantly. We got channels in there for memes and strongman and programming and PRs and form checks and gaming and movies and everything in between. We got stuff in there for life advice, so check that out. Remember basestrength.com for all of my nuggets of wisdom about training, and don't forget to check out Barbell Apparel. Thanks so much. Until next time, this is Bromley. I'll see you.